Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching Advanced Components. In this lesson, we're going to be learning all about functional components that allow us to create fast-loading presentational components and wrapper components. Let's jump into it. Here you can see we have a very simple component. All it does is print out an H1 with our topic, which is just wrapped in our default slot. This is a bit overkill for all the functionality that we're given in components as it is. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to create a simplified component, a slimmed down component? This is where functional components come in, and we're going to be using this icon, which you see here. Functional components can't have their own data, computer properties, watchers, lifecycle methods, or regular methods. They can't have a template unless it's precompiled from a single file component. However, we can have a render function, which we learned about in the last lesson. Functional components can be passed things like props, attributes, events, and slots. And they return a vnode or even an array of vnodes from a render function. See, normally we can't return an array of vnodes. You might be used to this error message, and then, you just wrap everything in a div. Well, if we use a functional component, we can have a render function which returns an array of nodes, not just one root element. Back in our original example, if we want to make this a functional component, we just send in that option like you see here. That's all there is to it. You might notice we have a new context parameter, which we have to use to access things like slots. This also gives us access to props, children, data, parent, and listeners. If we move our application into single file components, like we see here, we can then create a functional component simply by specifying it in the template as an attribute. This was introduced in Vue 2.5.0. At build time, this will get compiled into a render function. As you can imagine, this is great for presentational templates, but have little to no logic. It can speed up your application. Next, let's look at functional wrapper components. This is a way to programmatically delegate to specific components. So if we have an app component and it loads a Smart Table functional component, our functional component can decide which component to properly delegate to. I might render the normal table component or the empty table component. Let's move this idea into some code. Here you can see I have a div that loads a Smart Table component and sends in vehicles. Inside my JavaScript, I have two simple components, empty table and normal table. And obviously, these would be more complex, but I'm keeping things simple. Our root instance simply has our vehicles. Now I'll declare our Smart Table component and set it as functional. We'll expect to receive an items array as our prop. We'll then declare our render function, where we'll check to see if items length is greater than 0. If it is, we'll return normal table, passing through our component data and our children. Otherwise, we'll simply render empty table. It's worth noting here that we're passing through data and children, but data also includes attributes and event listeners. It's not just our vehicle data. Before we move on, I want to show you how some people would simplify this code using ES 2015 destructuring. In case you're not familiar with destructuring, here's a simple example. Here I have the full name object, and inside my print name function I can just print out first name and last name. But there's another way to write this using destructuring. Instead, I can write print name and specify first and last. See the curly braces in there? And then just print out of the console first and last. These two functions are essentially equivalent. Now, back inside of our render function, I can use the same technique and destructure my context object into props, data, and children. Then, as you can see, my code gets simplified. I no longer have to type out context dot in 5 different places. Let's take a look at a more complex function, which is straight out of the Vue documentation. Here you can see I have 4 different components: empty list, table list, ordered list, and unordered list. I have a smart list functional component, which returns a vnode through the createElement function, and calling an appropriate list component function, which we'll declare in a minute. It has 2 different props. That appropriate list component checks to see if my item's length is 0, and then return empty list. Otherwise, if it's an object, return table list. If it's ordered, then return order list. Otherwise, return unordered list. We're essentially delegating to the appropriate component using a functional wrapper component. Let's review. In this lesson, we learned all about functional components, starting with creating fast-loading presentational components, and then we learned about wrapper components. Thank you for watching. Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching Advanced Components. In this lesson, we'll be learning all about
robots.
Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching Advanced Components. In this lesson, we'll be learning. Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching